The future of macroeconomics. Welcome to our last topic in this course, in which we will discuss the future of macroeconomics. This topic is really an open-ended discussion, but we try to sketch out some of the ways economists are trying to reshape macroeconomics. Please read Chapter 19 in the textbook. In the aftermath of the 2009 financial crisis, the Institute for New Economic Thinking was formed in New York City. It is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, devoted to developing and sharing ideas that it hopes can repair what they call our broken economy and create a more equal, prosperous, and just society. To this end, the Institute's new vision of the economy is based on 8 key principles that it set forth. Those principles are: 1. Economists and their ideas must be independent from powerful interests. Otherwise, economics is beholden to those at the very top and fails to serve all of society. 2. Complexity and uncertainty are inherent in economic and financial systems. We must question theories based upon the flawed assumption that humans always behave rationally and predictably, and that markets always trend towards equilibrium. 3. Inequality and distribution matter as much to the economy as growth and productivity. 4. Heterodox models that pose alternatives to the neoclassical orthodoxy are essential to understanding the economy and promoting a vibrant intellectual pluralism. 5. History matters. We must learn the lessons of past mistakes, and also draw on roads not taken historically, to map a more equal and prosperous future. 6. Diversity of race, gender, class, and other forms of identity enrich economic thought. 7. An outdated economic structure is endangering our planet, but new approaches could save it. To uncover solutions, economists must first incorporate analyses of climate change, population growth, and stressed resources into their research. 8. Multidisciplinary learning. A discipline in isolation develops harmful blind spots. We collaborate with scholars in other social sciences, the humanities, and the natural sciences to better understand our world. Whether the Institute for New Thinking is successful or not remains to be determined. However, what is true is that this is just one of many efforts globally to rethink macroeconomics. Moreover, many of the Institute's stated principles also are embraced by others and other groups, asking the same questions about the evolution of macroeconomics. As noted already, this topic is quite different from earlier ones where there were learning objectives and a set of information to learn. This final topic is about facing the challenge. Macroeconomics always is evolving, but today questions are being raised about the right goals for the economy. Historic goals of a low unemployment rate, a low inflation rate, and strong economic growth are being questioned as too narrow for society today. The future of macroeconomics is an open-ended discussion, which you are asked to think about. The questions to consider in rethinking macroeconomics are: should the economy's goals be broadened? What are additional economic goals that should be included for society? How should those new economic goals be ranked for importance? Are some of those new goals mutually exclusive? That is, if you aim for one of them, must you exclude another? What metrics can be used to monitor those objectives? Is a broad objective of economic well-being practical for policymakers to set? How would policymakers achieve those broader economic goals? Okay, let's begin. Our starting point is to ask, why is macroeconomics facing a challenge today? MIT professors Banerjee and Duflo, who jointly won the 2019 Nobel Prize in Economics, opine that various political, social, and economic forces coalesced to finally shatter the stranglehold on basic economics. Ideas that were unthinkable till recently suddenly became acceptable, and responsible tools of economic management. This is a sea change that is washing over the profession, but it is one that has not coalesced in agreement about the new core principles should be. Has this shattering or challenge to some of the basic economic foundations led to more heterodoxy in economics? Earlier in reviewing the 8 principles of the Institute for New Thinking, one of its principles was to embrace heterodox models that pose alternatives to current models and theory. So far, this challenge to basic economic foundations, which Banerjee and Duflo observed, has led to a very limited rise in economic heterodoxy. There does not seem to be a widespread change proposed for macroeconomics. Instead, economists are proposing new goals to incorporate within the economic framework. Why is there a focus on new benchmarks of economic performance? Economist Joseph Stiglitz opined that measurement matters. He further argued, "We live in a world of metrics, where we are constantly quantifying our progress, our success. What we measure affects what we do. If we measure the wrong thing, we will do the wrong thing. If we don't measure something, it becomes neglected, as if the problem didn't exist." A major focus of this movement to find broader benchmarks of economic performance is to improve policy. Should economic well-being replace economic growth, real GDP, as the nation's macroeconomic goal? This is, maybe, the first fundamental challenge to macroeconomics. The Well-Being Economy Alliance, a global alliance of over 200 organizations, argues that the ultimate aim of well-being-oriented metrics is to replace GDP as the key performance indicator, with those metrics that measure performance in terms of contribution to well-being, sustainability, and equity. These alternative metrics would guide governments, companies, citizens, and organizations to manage their activities differently. That is, implementing a new type of policy making, replacing policies that are narrowly focused on economic growth. To this end, measuring economic well-being is gaining traction among statistical agencies, such as at the OECD, with its Beyond GDP initiative, the European Commission, the UK's Office of National Statistics, and even the US Bureau of Economic Analysis, with the BEA's project known as GDP and Beyond. But there are no well-being measures that have broad-based support as a policy goal, and the nascent research has a long way to go. So, there is work at the statistical agencies to explore well-being measures, but for the most part it is well under the radar. Is there precedence for well-being as a central economic goal for an economy? Attempts to cast the concept of well-being as a key macroeconomic objective, instead of real GDP, may appear recent, but it is far from new to economics. English economist William Stanley Jevons argued along a similar, though not identical, path. In 1874, Jevons wrote, "Maximizing aggregate pleasure and minimizing aggregate pain are undoubtedly the ultimate objectives of an economy." Jevons further clarified his view by noting, in other words, to maximize comfort and pleasure is the problem of the economy. Of course, what was considered pleasure and comfort in the late 1800s is quite different than what is assumed to generate it in the 21st century. Therefore, the concept of economic well-being, if it is measurable, is likely to be continually evolving over time. And that is one key challenge to measuring performance. If an economic well-being measure could be developed, how should it be used? The history of economic gap models, as discussed and demonstrated in this course, has existed for well over 100 years. One might imagine this approach could be extended to well-being. If a broad-based consensus could be achieved for a well-being goal, then a gap-type model could be useful, to examine policies that could close the gap between the well-being measure target and the current reading. Therefore, one macroeconomic paradigm already exists, as you learned, that could make well-being a policy goal through the gap model. However, It remains a formidable challenge to develop that metric, even if the economic apparatus exists for analysis. How should an economic well-being metric be compiled? Conceptually, the Well-Being Alliance opined that there is not one blueprint for the well-being economy. The shape, institutions, and activities that get us there will look different, both across countries and between different communities within countries. This, of course, implies that there is no single metric either. Let's take a moment to consider the discussion about well-being as articulated by the Well-Being Economy Alliance. As you listen to this discussion, think about how this might remake macroeconomics, but also think about how practical it is. Should all of these well-being goals be incorporated into that third wheel of economic policy, which is an industrial policy? Or, maybe, what more appropriately should be dubbed a social, environmental, and industrial policy? Or does that well-being objective need to totally replace the current economic goals that we have dwelled upon in this course? This video lasts about 2.5 minutes.
A well-being economy is an economy which puts the well-being of people and the planet first. The economy is a means to an end, not an end in and of itself.
It's an economy that creates wealth, prosperity for human beings, societies, and the planet.
By well-being, I'm thinking about both physical and mental health, the chance to participate in society and to flourish. So a very holistic view of well-being, and I believe that's what our economies should be for.
So well-being suggests an improvement, suggests a better life, suggests a change in the way we are with others, with our economy, with nature.
For me, a well-being economy is one where the world is just and it values the people and it values nature, where there's equality and where we also care about our habitats, our home, our earth.
The key thing is getting all this amazing work together because it exists. People are demonstrating, whether it's small projects or amazing progressive businesses or policymakers who are going against the grain of GDP growth. People are there saying and showing us this is what a well-being economy looks like.
We see it as a unique moment where we can meet with others and maybe create, and we hope, a global movement for an economy of well-being that's based on fairness and real health.
It's really important that people who are kind of standing on the streets and making a practical change hands-on are being part of larger coalitions who try to work on different levels.
It's a whole system and it has to be tackled as a whole system. And I believe that We All is trying to do that.
The Post-Growth Institute's so excited to be part of We All because it's a chance for us to connect with others committed to a vision of a future that works for everyone within ecological limits.
We're at a crisis point in humanity with the environment, with inequality, with people's standard of living.
If your heart sinks when you can't afford housing, or if you really want to understand what is it that we're doing to our planet, then this is a movement that is most vital.
Okay, rest assured that I am not advocating this approach, but trying to get you to think about the limitations of the macroeconomic models and theories that we have surveyed in this course. Consider another discussion about embracing a broader set of goals for an economy by the Council of the European Union, which among its other functions coordinates EU countries' policies. As said in this video, the EU Council asks, how do we come to an economy of well-being? The Council video says that it is not sure they have the answer to achieve that economy, but opines that maybe we just need to start thinking differently. It is for this reason, I think, it is appropriate to end this course with this open-ended question about where macroeconomics is headed. Let's now watch this short video, which lasts about 2.5 minutes.
We often think of the economy as a straight line. We work hard to produce a lot so we can consume more, increase our gains, and spend it all again. But where does this take us? Our society and our planet? What if the economy was not a straight line, but more like a web, like a beautiful spider web, without the spider, of course, with different lines representing values such as innovation, education, equality, health, that come together to make like an economy of well-being. That's the word. Must remember it. The economy of well-being. It's based on the simple idea that our well-being makes our economy grow, and the other way around. In this economy, success is not only measured in terms of productivity and gains, but also in terms of happiness, physical and mental health of citizens, sustainability. So, we invest in people's well-being, and they are healthier, more innovative and productive, and they work and pay taxes without feeling too bad about it, because the money they pay is used to improve their well-being. And work is not the only thing. People enjoy their work, of course, but they also have time for friends and family. Men and women are more equal, and you don't need to come from a rich family to get into university or to become a famous scientist. And we're not destroying our planet, because we finally realize that it's the only one we have. So we're taking care of it. Sounds great, doesn't it? But how do we come to this economy? I'm not sure I have the answer. Maybe we just need to start thinking differently. So let's erase the straight line and look beyond the market, beyond averages, beyond the here and now, and into the future. Let's start building an economy of well-being. The end.
One of those principles of the Institute for New Thinking is to address inequality in the economy. This is nothing new, and this has always been a focus of standard fiscal policy. And today this objective also has crept somewhat into monetary policy discussions. So, if we are to fit this goal for more income equality into a well-being economy, how should we do that? The answer to this question is not totally clear, given the state of our inequality measurement and policies. Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank economists opined that inequality is a complex and multidimensional subject. Accounting for some aspects of inequality probably still is beyond the limits both of existing theory and of the available computational technologies. Clearly, additional research is needed to more appropriately and adequately address inequality from a macroeconomics perspective. Another challenge is whether the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model paradigm should be abandoned and replaced by a new paradigm. In Kate Raworth's book, Donut Economics, she challenges readers to change the macroeconomic goals that are widely embraced around the world by fiscal and monetary policymakers, and to replace the circular flow concept, which is tied into aggregate demand equals aggregate supply, with what she calls an embedded economy. An embedded economic flow intertwines all parts of society, including social, environmental, income distribution, and more, with the economy. This may or may not be the best paradigm, but it should get you thinking about alternative goals for macroeconomics and alternative ways of reaching those goals. For a deeper discussion of what is meant by donut economics, let's listen to this introduction of the concept by Professor Kate Raworth. It is a bit long, 26 minutes long to be exact, but she has a story to tell about reshaping the traditional macroeconomic perspective, which we have largely discussed throughout this course. Let's now watch the video.
Hello, I'm Kate Rayworth, and this is an introduction to the core concepts of donut economics. What motivated me to write Donut Economics was a frustration with the concepts at the heart of my own economics education, concepts that are still far too often taught today. Because at the heart of what I'm going to call 20th century economics and its mindset are core images that show us the underlying ideas of what the economy is and who it's for and who we are and what success looks like. And these, I believe, do not equip us for the reality and challenges ahead. In the 20th century economic mindset, the first image that is so often still taught is the supply and demand of the market. This puts markets immediately at the center of our vision. It makes price the fundamental metric of concern. And it means that anything that falls outside of a market contract is called an externality. This is far, far too narrow a starting point for today's economic thinking. The biggest picture is known as the circular flow of income and goods, with households and businesses in the essential market relationship, and some leakages and reinjections via banks, governments, and trade. The fundamental point about this diagram is that it makes absolutely no account for energy or the material basis of the economy. It says nothing about unpaid caring work that makes labour fresh and ready for work every day. And it's silent on the commons. So this diagram is too small and does not take account of everything that matters for the health of an economy. The self-portrait of humanity at the heart of this 20th century economic mindset, it's rational economic man, and he would look something like this. He would be a man standing alone with money in his hand, ego in his heart, a calculator in his head, and nature at his feet. He hates work, he loves luxury, he knows the price of everything. The tragic fact of this character is not only how absurdly narrow he is, but that on being told that he is like us, we actually start to become more like him. Students over time say that they more value competition over collaboration. They value self-interest over altruism. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we'll become. We need a new portrait of humanity. And the goal of 20th century economic thought, it's so deeply rooted it's never drawn, but it underlies every economist's lecture and politician's speech. The goal is endless growth measured in GDP or national income. Economies growing no matter how rich they already are, the idea is that they will succeed by yet more growth. Add to this two fundamental beliefs that were dominant in the second half of the 20th century about economic dynamics. On inequality, the Kuznets curve, based off the work of Simon Kuznets in the mid-20th century, seemed to imply that as countries get richer, first inequality will increase, but then it will decrease. This promises that growth will even things up again. It turns out not to be true, but it has underpinned over 50 years of trickle-down theory of grow now and even things up later. When it comes to the environment, the environmental Kuznets curve created in the 1990s seemed to tell a similar story, that as countries get richer, pollution will at first increase, but then it will fall. And this underpinned the promise that growth will clean things up again, except it doesn't. Because when we take account not only of local pollutants, but global pollutants, that curve does not bend down naturally at all. So these ideas about the dynamics of the economy, that growth will even things up again and growth will clean things up again, gave great legitimacy for the pursuit of growth. But it turns out that these dynamics do not hold. I believe these core concepts together have played a powerful role in shaping the economy that we have created. And so the 21st century has begun with repeated crises. From financial meltdown in 2008, we live in an era of climate and ecological breakdown, which has given rise to protesters against whom there is crackdown. And we lived through years of COVID lockdown. Now, these crises are reported separately in the news, but they are deeply interconnected. They show us how connected we are with each other and with the rest of the living world. They show us that they hit with great inequalities of gender and of race, of wealth and power between the global north and the global south. And they show us that systems based on endless expansion will create their own feedback effects. If you create a financial system that aims to endlessly expand, you will create a bubble that will pop. If we create a system of energy and material use of endless expansion, we will induce climate and ecological breakdown. And if we have a system of human settlements ever pushing into areas of wildlife, coupled with ever increasing global travel, we create perfect conditions for zoonotic disease transfer and pandemics. Can we move away from thinking that the shape of progress is endless growth and expansion? Can we find a different vision? And that is what Donut Economics aims to do. So here are the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist set out in the book. In this presentation, I'm going to cover some of these 7 ways to thread them together as the beginnings of a 21st century story. Let's start with what we could take as the first picture in the economics, and it should be the goal. What is the economy for? What is our purpose? If we don't know that, how will we ever know what success looks like? So the donut acts as a possible compass for human prosperity in the very broadest sense. And as you can see here in this image, the essence of it is that we should leave no one in the hole facing critical levels of human deprivation. But at the same time, as we use Earth's resources and means, we must not overshoot an ecological ceiling and cause critical planetary degradation. We need to seek to live in that safe and just space for humanity in between the two, and that is the donut-shaped space. How can we give specificity to the human deprivations and the planetary degradation? We can fill it in by creating a social foundation below which no one should fall short. And this is based on the Sustainable Development Goals, because through the SDGs, all of the governments in the world have agreed that every person in the world has a claim to meeting their essential needs in terms of all these 12 social dimensions. That's why they've been crowdsourced from the Sustainable Development Goals. So leave no one falling short on the essentials of life in the hole in the middle of the donut. But as we collectively use Earth's resources, we must also make sure that we do not overshoot that ecological ceiling of the 9 planetary boundaries identified by Earth system scientists first in 2009 as the critical life-supporting systems that make life work on this delicately balanced planet, that have held this planet in a stable space for the last 11,000 years, a space in which all human civilizations have been created, and this is the space in which humanity can thrive. So the goal is instantly changed. It's no longer endless growth exponentially up a curve. It's thriving in balance between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling shown here. Very different shape of progress. When I first drew this diagram in 2012, I was amazed by the traction it had with people, and it led me to look at the visualization, the image of health, of thriving, of well-being that have been drawn by indigenous cultures worldwide for millennia. And it was so striking to see that again and again, this sense of a dynamic circle is a recurring feature. And so I now think of Donut Economics as a mindset recovery program for those with a Western industrial economic education. Can we recover from thinking that endless growth is progress, using the donut towards something that's been reflected in indigenous wisdoms for a very long time? Can the donut help be a bridge towards that? If thriving in balance is indeed where we want to get to, we are very far from that right now. As all of the red in this diagram shows, it shows that billions of people are falling short on the essentials of life, falling below the social foundation. For food, for example, that red wedge on food goes 11% of the way towards the center of the circle, because 11% of people worldwide do not have enough food to eat every day. And you can see on every one of these social foundations, some are measured with 1 indicator, some are measured with 2, that people are falling short on the essentials of life. We need to eliminate all of the red from the middle of this picture. But at the same time, we have already overshot multiple planetary boundaries on climate change, on excessive fertilizer use, on excessive land conversion, biodiversity loss. And indeed, scientists have recently updated this and recognize even on water withdrawals and on chemical pollution, we are also in overshoot. So we are living way beyond the boundaries. This is a world dangerously out of balance on both sides. What would it mean to come back into that space of balance. We see this news in the headlines every day, and it can be overwhelming. Can we remain sensitive and aware to the impact of what is happening to the earth, what is happening to her people, the extremes of inequality? The richest 1% of people own half of the world's wealth. I profoundly believe that our children and their children will judge our generation against this compass and will ask us, what did you do once that you knew, once that you saw this as the challenge that humanity faces? What role did you play in turning the story around? And let's recognize that last century's economic theories, last century's governmental policies and business models and lifestyles, none of them were designed to solve this problem. We need to create new economic models of our own. We need to create new governmental policies, new business models, new lifestyle aspirations, and new relationships between the global north and the global south to turn this story around. So if getting into the donut is the goal, what kind of economic mindset would give us even half a chance of getting there? Let's start again with a new big picture of the economy. Let's call it the embedded economy, because this diagram brings together ecological economics, feminist economics, and commons theory to recognize that the economy is embedded in society, structured by social, political, cultural, and legal constructs. And human society itself is embedded in the living world, dependent upon those planetary boundaries with a stable climate and ozone and protection, nutrient cycle, fresh water, healthy oceans, thriving biodiversity, and fertile soils. So the economy is a subset of society, is a subset of the living world, and it's bathed in a river of solar energy from the sun. The economy draws in living matter and materials, and it puts out waste matter back into the biosphere. So right from day one, we have to ask the ecological economic question of how big can the through flow of the economy be so that it does not disrupt the cycles and the stability of biodiversity and Earth's systems. And then let's look within the economy itself and recognize that there are 4 fundamental ways in which we provision for our needs and wants. And within each of these, there are many different roles that we can and do play. Let's start with the market, which is defined by price-based exchange, where you may be a consumer or a producer. And within that space of production, are you a labourer earning a wage or a capital owner earning the rents and profits? Or you may be excluded from markets and destitute without access to them. Let's focus on the role of the state, where one may be a resident accessing public services or a public servant providing them. You may be a voter or a protester, all fundamental roles we can play in relation to the state, or may be stateless and not recognised. Now, the market and the state in the 20th century became the dominant ideological boxing match between being a free market, laissez-faire capitalist and a state-loving socialist. And in that ideological boxing match, it got so intense that economists lost sight of 2 other fundamental forms of provisioning for our needs and wants. There's the household, where we all begin every day. We may be a parent or a child, a partner, a relative, or you may be kinless without that familial household support, the unpaid caring work of cooking, washing, cleaning, sweeping, raising the children, doing it all again tomorrow. It's unpaid, but it's essential to our well-being. And then there's the commons, where we come together, not through the market or the state, but as a community to co-produce goods and services we value. Here you may be a commoner, a steward, a co-creator, a volunteer, or indeed excluded from access to the commons. And let's also recognise that there's the role of financial markets, financial flows moving between these different forms. In this space, one might be a creditor or a debtor, an investor or a speculator, or financially excluded without access to finance. So now we have the market, the state, the household, and the commons, and intermediated by financial flows. Of course, some of the most interesting and important action in an economy goes on at the synergy between these different forms. So market commons or the state and the commons. There are also power relationships between the market and the household, the market and the state and the commons. I know that I wouldn't want to live in an economy that lacked any one of these four fundamental forms of provisioning because they all bring unique characteristics. But what are the skills to make them work well? What are the values and the traits of behavior that will enable us to create economies that provision for our needs and wants through these ways, rather than concentrate value and opportunity and wealth in the hands of a few? And this is why it really matters how we think about human nature. We need to nurture the best of human nature, because rational economic man, that character I introduced earlier, his traits that are ascribed to him in mainstream economics have been that he is self-interested, he has fixed preferences, he's not influenced by advertising but only informed by it. He's isolated in that he's independent from the preferences and actions of others, that he's ever calculating in his head the percentage opportunity or comparing all prices over all time, and that he's dominant over nature and the rest of the living world. The dangers of this model are that we start to become like this model. We start to mimic it and believe it true. In fact, we are social and adaptable humans. We are the most social of all mammals. And it is our connection to each other that greatly defines who we are and how we behave. So instead of imagining ourselves as merely self-interested, we should start by recognizing our social reciprocity. Instead of thinking we have fixed preferences, recognize that we have fluid values that can be triggered and amplified or withered and lost. Rather than thinking of ourselves as isolated, recognize that we're interdependent upon and with one another. Rather than imagining that we are ever calculating, we are actually approximating, we are heuristic beings. And rather than thinking of ourselves dominant over the rest of the living world, recognize that we are dependent upon it and part of the web of life. These are some of the steps and some of the changes that are taking place in reimagining and remaking human nature and bringing this far more realistic version of ourselves to the heart of new economic thinking. So how can humanity get into the donut? Let's recognize from this image that this is a deeply degraded world running down the life support systems of our planetary home in overshoot. It's also a deeply divided world in which billions of people can't meet their most essential needs and others are in overconsumption. So it's not going to be by believing that growth will even things up again, because it won't. And it's not going to happen by believing that growth will simply clean up after itself, because it won't. We need to change the dynamics of our economy. We need to become regenerative and distributive by design. So we've inherited linear degenerative economic systems where we take Earth's materials, we make them into stuff we want, we use it for a while, and then we throw it away. And this take, make, use, lose, this is what pushes us over planetary boundaries, taking again and again from Earth's sources and throwing waste again and again into Earth's sinks. We must transform that linear degenerative process into a cyclical or circular regenerative process in which resources aren't used up, they're used again and again, far more carefully, collectively, creatively, and slowly, separating biological materials so that Earth can break them down through decomposition and build them again anew. This is how nature works. And separate those biological materials from technical human-made materials that won't decompose because we have transformed them in the way we've made them. And so they need to be refurbished and repaired and restored and reused and shared and, as a last resort, recycled, but never thrown away, because there is no away. So this is an economy that will work with and within the cycles of the living world. It's a move from degenerative to regenerative in, for example, agriculture, landscape degradation, to landscape restoration, and nature's generosity in coming back. Even when we have pushed her extremely to the edge, nature is currently still generous and coming back in so many places. It's moving from degenerative linear manufacturing, where we throw away waste in the neighborhoods of the world's poorest people, to creating a circular or cyclical repair-based, refurbishment, reuse-based manufacturing, so that things are not being thrown away in the first place. It's moving from car-centered transport, such as this highway in Seoul in Korea, replacing that 10-lane highway with a river and a park, bringing nature back into the city. So literally regenerating the places we live, and down to the level of a building. Compare this nature-less hospital in the UK to this nature-rich hospital in Singapore. Which hospital would you prefer to heal and get well again in? We know that we heal much faster when we are connected to nature and see ourselves as part of this regenerative natural system. So at the same time as moving from degenerative to regenerative, we need to change deep dynamics of inequalities, because we've inherited economic systems that through infrastructure, through law, through privilege, through regulation, they are tending to capture opportunity and value in the hands of a few. And this leads to the rise of a 1% in many countries nationally, certainly globally. We need to transform that divisive dynamic into one that is far more distributive by design, sharing opportunity and value with all who co-create it. And that turns out to be the whole of society. Some examples of possible entry points for distributive design. Think of the contrast between the housing and rental crisis in cities like London, where many residents feel now that they will never be able to afford their own home because rents are so high, and the market has been captured by many international and large-scale landlords who see housing as an investment asset. Contrast that with the city of Vienna, which has over 60% of its residents living in social housing, which is central, it's normal, it's affordable, it's good quality, because over 100 years ago, the city of Vienna decided that housing is not an investment asset, it's a human right, and decided to own the housing by the city and city-run cooperatives to make that possible. Think in terms of transport, contrasting a massive traffic jam of private cars in Beijing and many, many cities worldwide. Contrast that with the priority given to public transport in the city of Curitiba in Brazil, with dedicated bus lanes that make traveling by bus affordable, it's the fastest, simplest way to get around. And it means that those coming in from distant suburbs actually reduce the excessive amount of time that they spend traveling. Very important time for lower income households to reclaim. Think of it in terms of from divisive to distributive forms of energy production, from major companies, multinationals drilling for oil in the North Sea and many other parts of the world, to community run and owned microgrids shown here in Kenya. Or think of it in terms of business, moving from a very 20th century model where business had been driven by profit, but that's only one model of business. It can also be purpose-led, such as this handicraft company in Mumbai, in which the profits are shared far more equitably with all of the workers. So we're moving from degenerative to regenerative dynamics, from divisive to distributive dynamics. These will help to meet the needs of all people, simultaneously coming back within the means of the living planet. And of course, this raises the question of the future of economic growth. If the goal is to become regenerative and distributive by design, what does this mean for the future of growth? Let's just start by recognizing that the idea of endless economic growth has an absurdity within it, that no matter how rich a country already is, the idea that its success lies on yet more growth without end cannot make sense, especially on a delicately balanced living planet in which earning income and spending income cannot be fully decoupled at all from energy and material use. In nature's growth curve has an exponential phase. That's about growth being a healthy, dynamic part of the life cycle, but then it grows up and it comes to maturity and comes to plateau. Everything in nature thrives by following this growth path. Can we transform our economies so that they too learn not to aim to grow endlessly, but learn to grow up and start to thrive in balance? And of course, this is particularly relevant to high-income countries that already have earned the income and the wealth and accumulation to lead good lives and to meet the needs of all people, that already have massive ecological overshoot and have the obligation to move first and fastest to coming back within planetary boundaries. How can they remove their dependency on endless growth that has been currently written into their economies? So pulling back, 20th century economics centers concepts that do not serve the realities and the challenges of our times. Let's replace them with 21st century concepts that give us the donut as the goal to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, that recognize the economy is embedded in the society, embedded in the living world, and utterly dependent upon them. That we need to bring forth all and that we need to nurture the best of human nature so that we recognize ourselves as social, adaptable beings who can collaborate and steward and develop the skills and behaviors and values that will enable us to live well together over 8 billion people in the 21st century. We need to create dynamics in our economy that take us from being degenerative by design to regenerative by design, from being divisive by design to being distributive by design. And that means questioning the pursuit of endless growth and finding ways to end dependency on endless growth, especially in the higher income countries, so that instead of growing endlessly, they can start to learn to thrive. These are many of the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. And at Donut Economics Action Lab, we explore what it would mean to put them into practice in the world of business, working with local governments and cities, in communities, and in our own lives. And we invite you to explore these ways with us.
The donut economy concept has found a following around the globe. Here is one of those followers from the Quebec, Canada. This Canadian group, with backing from the Quebec provincial government, has developed indicators of well-being in Quebec, which span the economy, society, and the environment. However, some of the indicators are yet to be documented and determined, and only have a placeholder now for the concept, such as prosperity in the social economy, or an equality metric that is called the quality of childcare services. Hence, these indicators of well-being in Quebec clearly are a work in progress. Beyond developing a well-being dashboard of indicators for an economy, as this Quebec group is doing, it is important to have benchmarks of success for each well-being indicator. This is yet another challenge. Also, there is a need to weight indicators in a dashboard based on some criteria, yet to be determined, that gives some concepts more importance for success and others less. Another Canadian example of this donut paradigm is shown on this slide from the University of Waterloo. Again, a lot of these initiatives are a work in progress. Should a high degree of economic mobility replace the low unemployment rate as an economic goal? This is a value judgment. Harvard professor Raj Chetty argues that, according to some studies, the public prefers a high degree of economic mobility generally, more than the desirability of a more equal income distribution. However, the ability to move up the economic ladder is a longer-run focus than the shorter-run goal of a low unemployment rate, so those two objectives could coexist in a well-being dashboard. If economic mobility is a metric of well-being, how should economic mobility be measured? Paul Winfrey opined that economic mobility is a dynamic process. As people move from one rung of economic achievement to another, their earnings, income, and wealth do not necessarily hold constant. Thus, the 3 measures of economic mobility must be analyzed together to explain an individual's economic condition. There is no comprehensive measure of economic inequality and mobility, but several metrics, used together, can give a more complete picture. Looking exclusively at income inequality or mobility is not enough. Income, earnings, and wealth all contribute to an accurate assessment of inequality and mobility in America. Here too, if 3 measures of mobility are important, all 3 can be added to a well-being dashboard of indicators. Finally, is there an economic approach that can encompass new objectives by blending traditional economic goals with social, environmental, and other publicly held policy aims? Yes. The original institutional approach argued exactly for a broader set of objectives and considerations to be taken into account in developing economic theory and empirical insights. Now, we will revisit those questions that were rhetorically asked earlier. But we now actually seek your thoughts. There are no correct or incorrect answers to these questions since they are largely normative. Should the economy's goals be broadened? What are additional economic goals that should be included for society? How should those new economic goals be ranked for importance? Are some of those new goals mutually exclusive? That is, if you aim for one of them, must you exclude another? What metrics can be used to monitor those objectives? Is a broad objective of economic well-being practical for policymakers to set? How would policymakers achieve those broader economic goals? To provide your perspective, since you cannot speak to this video, you are asked to submit an essay that incorporates your thinking about the future of macroeconomics, as captured in those questions. You should not use that list of questions to answer them one by one, but instead provide a well-rounded comprehensive response to whether, or not, macroeconomics needs to evolve to a broader perspective and goals, as some argue today. But keep in mind, just because we covered this topic here, it does not mean you have to agree on the need to recast macroeconomics. You may think it is too soon to do that, or you may agree with the need to do it now. Either perspective is fine, as long as it is well reasoned. In crafting your essay, be sure to be specific in what you think is an appropriate, and not appropriate, perspective in the conventional foundations of macroeconomics, which we covered in this course, and if there may be benefits from incorporating new thinking. This essay should be a minimum of about 500 words, which typically is 2 typed pages. I wish to end this course with a thought offered by John Maynard Keynes that was contained in his tribute to his teacher Alfred Marshall, which was published in the September 1924 issue of the Economic Journal, which is the journal of the Royal Economic Society. Although Keynes published those words 100 years ago, they still ring true today. He wrote about the characteristics of a master economist, which he recognized in Alfred Marshall. Keynes said, "The master economist must possess a rare combination of gifts. One must be a mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher, in some degree. One must understand symbols, and speak in words. One must contemplate the particular, in terms of the general, and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. One must study the present, in the light of the past, for the purposes of the future. No part of a person's nature or one's institutions must lie entirely outside one's regard. One must be purposeful and disinterested in a simultaneous mood, as aloof and incorruptible as an artist, yet sometimes as near to earth as a politician." Keynes captures what is needed to be an economist, which is a fully rounded perspective of a mathematician, historian, statesman, and philosopher. Too often, specialization has shut out those broader perspectives. Keynes poetically says, "An economist must understand symbols, but speak in words." Here too often economists simply speak in symbols, and fail to adequately communicate with the non-specialist or politician, who may be in search of economic guidance. But, maybe, one of his most important points, lost over the years, was an echo of his father's comment, when he wrote that no part of a person's nature and institutions must be disregarded. This is the essence of the political economy view, that was ingrained in the old institutionalist perspective, which has been lost by the profession. Perhaps, Keynes foresaw today's rumblings to make macroeconomic goals more encompassing. Also, poetically, Keynes says that the economist must study the present, in light of the past, for purposes of the future. How true! I hope, you too, can achieve the status of a master economist in knowledge, even if it is not your career. In this course, we have traveled the macroeconomic landscape, on a road to survey the institutions, history, data, and major thinking that defines macroeconomics today. We began our trip exploring basic microeconomic concepts, for motivation and later application to the counterpart concepts in macroeconomics. We discovered economic databases to see the latest economic developments. Along the road, we discussed and worked with the big three economic statistics, jobs, inflation, and output. We wove together stories, or theories, how those three concepts were intertwined. We also showed how to package those concepts in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model, which is a paradigm to explain recession and boom periods, demand pull and cost push inflation, and potential or steady state growth. We delved into discussions about money, banking, and monetary policy. Among these topics we discussed the importance and risks of the non-bank financial intermediation sector, a mouthful of words, which is often simply referred to as shadow banking. We learned why a bank fails, and why there has been so much consolidation in the banking industry. We learned what the goals are for the Federal Reserve, and how it conducts monetary policy, guided by a blend of theory, rules of thumb, and judgment. Similarly, we delved into fiscal policy and economic policy making. Along this part of the road, we discussed how the federal budget is developed by Congress, and about the political bumps encountered in fiscal budgeting. We concluded our journey by considering where macroeconomics is heading and why the field is evolving. I hope this course has whet your appetite to continue to explore the subject, along the macroeconomics highway. But if not, I hope this course provides you with the requisite grounding to better understand today's financial news. With these concluding words, I wish to thank you for taking this journey with me and wish you the best in your future studies. Goodbye for now.